Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here then just welcome, and I hope that you will stick around. On my channel I mostly do crochet content, and I recently made this filet crochet dress, which is basically my first and the biggest filet crochet project that I have done. And I also got some comments and questions from you if I would be able to do some more like explanation of how to do filet crochet. So I thought that I will take this opportunity because I feel like this technique is getting and becoming more and more popular, and I also feel like there are many people out there who would like to learn it. So today this is what we are going to do. I will do a little bit of an instructional video of how to follow filet crochet graphs, how to calculate stitches, what kind of stitches are being used, and how to basically read a graph to be able to create your project. So by the end of this video, I hope that you will be able to master any filet crochet graph out there. So now let's jump into it. So here I have some materials, and I also drew a little graph and made some notes, and we will go through these together in a bit. But first, let's talk about materials. So for the dress, I actually used 4-ply cotton, and initially it suggests to use 3 to 3.5 millimeter crochet hook, and I ended up using 3 millimeter hook just because I wanted to have kind of like a lacier look. But otherwise my initial hope was actually to use this yarn, which requires or suggests to use 2.5 millimeter hook, and that would have given my dress a little bit lacier look. But otherwise you're more than welcome to use any type of yarn you wish, and it also depends on what you're creating and what kind of look you are going for. But for today, for this example, I will be also using 4-ply cotton yarn, and in this case I have just picked this red color because I wanted to have something that is easier to work with and also stitches are easier to see. And for that I will be using 3.5 millimeter hook because that is kind of my favorite one when I'm working with 4-ply cotton yarn. So now let's jump into this graph and all the notes that I have made. So filet crochet basically consists of double crochet stitches and chains, and when you get a filet crochet pattern you typically just get like a graph like this, where you, by following that, you are basically establishing some sort of drawing within the creation that you are working on. And here I just have my dress as an example. As you can see, I have very many squares or blocks that are empty, and then I also have filled ones, and with these filled ones I was able to create like flowers within the dress and so on. So basically to create one block you are required to have 3 stitches, and depending on if the block is empty or filled, it also depends what kind of stitches you have to use. So for the empty blocks we have 1 double crochet, chain 1 in between, and then another double crochet. And then for the filled blocks we have 3 double crochet stitches that are one after each other, and that is for creating one block. So one block is 3 stitches, and then if we wanted to add an additional block we would basically just have to add 2 more stitches. So 1, 2, 3, this is 1, and then if we want to have another one we have to add 1 and 2, and so on if we want to have an extra ones. So that is how you can calculate how many blocks are needed if you are working on your own drawing, or if you're trying to figure out how many chains or stitches are needed for the base to be able to start working on this graph or pattern. Then for the graph itself, typically in the pattern it would be written if it's either starting to work from bottom or from the top, or it's also up to you how it's easier for you to actually read the graph and then follow each row. But whenever you are starting to work on a filet crochet pattern, you basically just have to figure out how many chains are needed for this very first row when you are actually starting to add in squares. So you basically have 2 options, or it's also totally up to you. So basically you can start with just having some chains that are calculated upon how many blocks here you have, and then right away you're proceeding with this first row where you're already following this graph here, or you could have something that is kind of like with single crochet stitches where you have a little bit of a border. So if you're choosing the first option with chains, it means that you have to count how many blocks you have here. So in this tiny example, we have 5 blocks in total, and then we basically just have to multiply it by 2, so we get 10. And then we just have to add 4 more chains, which basically means that this is this part where we would have the side, and these 3 would count as 1 double crochet. And then we add another chain, which would be the 4th one for this space here. And then after that, we are proceeding here with double crochet. So in this instance, if we are using chains as a base, we would have to do 14 chains in total, and then we are proceeding with that. Else, we can also do single crochet base, which would mean that we first have to count how many blocks we have here. So in total, we have 5, then we multiply it by 2 for each of the block that we have, and then we just add 2, and then we are able to do 1 row with single crochets. And first we just have to skip the very last chain that we did, and then in each chain we are doing 1 single crochet. But I feel like this is sounding a little bit complicated, so I will just show you in action how you can work with both of these methods. And first let's start with the chain base, and then we will just follow this graph that we have here. So here I have my yarn, and let's get started. So first we just have to make a slip knot like this, and then, as I explained, we have to do some chains. So in this case, we have 5 blocks and we multiply it by 2. So we have 10 chains in total, plus we have to add 4 for this first square that we would have here. So in total, I'm just starting with chaining 14 chains. So here I have these 14 chains, and now we can start working on this first row that we have here. And first we just have to establish this first block that we have, and for that we just have to skip 5 stitches or 5 chains, and then in the 6th one, this is where we are going to make our first double crochet. And this will basically, these skipped chains will help us to establish this first empty block, because we have to create some space for double crochet on the side, and also here gap at the top and also at the bottom. So let's skip 5 chains. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now in the 6th one we are just adding 1 double crochet. So I'm just doing that like this. So now we have basically created our first block here, and then if we are following this graph, we can see that again we have to have another empty block, and for that we are just chaining 1 and then also skipping 1 stitch or 1 chain here at the bottom, and then in the next one we are just adding 1 double crochet again. So I'm just completing that, and it looks like this. So now we have created these 2 blocks that we needed, and then the next one is a filled one. And as I said, filled blocks are consisting of 3 double crochet stitches. So now we already have this one, and we just have to add 2 more. So right away in the next one we are just adding double crochet, and then also in the following. So 3 double crochet stitches, 1 after each other like this. So now we have 1 filled block, and then we just have to add 2 more empty ones. So again we are just chaining 1, skipping 1, and then in the next one adding 1 double crochet like this. So another empty block that we have just added, and then again 1 more in the very last. So skipping 1, and then in the last chain we are just adding 1 more like this. So now the first row is completed, and this is how it looks. Then to start working on the next row, again we just have to start with an empty square, and for that we just have to chain 4, and this chain of 4 is going to count as 1 double crochet plus chain 1 space. So 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then we can just turn or work. And then after that we are just adding double crochet here on top of this double crochet stitch that we have. So I'm doing that. And with this, we have again created one block, which is here on top of this one that we had. And then if we look at this graph, we can see that we have 3 filled double crochet stitches. So that just means that we have to add double crochet stitches which are covering these 3 blocks. And you can choose what you want to do, but normally when I have an empty block, I just like to do double crochet by going through this block. But otherwise, if you want, you can also do it by going through the actual chain, but I feel like it's a little bit of a extra unnecessary work. But now I'm just adding double crochets until I have also filled or covered this block. So like this, now we have 3 squares that are filled, and the last one is just to do 1 empty square. So for that, again, chaining 1 and then doing 1 double crochet here on top of this 3rd chain from the very start where we started, and in between we are still having 1 empty chain. Like this. So we have also managed to create 1 empty block in here for both of these rows. And then if we check our graph, you can see that now we have 2 rows with just filled blocks, which basically means that we just have to add double crochet stitches on top of every single double crochet that we have, as well as every single space, chain space that we have here. So it's very easy. We are starting with 3 chains because that would count as 1 double crochet. So 1, 2, and 3. Then we are just turning our work and starting to add 1 double crochet stitch inside this empty block. So I'm just adding it in there. And then after that, we just have to add 1 double crochet on top of every single stitch that we have from the previous row that we created. Like this. And now just the very last block. So I'm adding double crochet inside it, and then also 1 double crochet on top of this 3rd chain on the side, like that. And then we just have 1 more row with only filled squares. So for that, again, I'm just starting with 3 chains. And then I also didn't mention, but we are kind of like skipping this first one and then starting with the next one. That is where we are adding our first double crochet. It's just because 3 chains basically counts as 1 double crochet. And then after that, we are just adding 1 double crochet on top of every single stitch that we have here. And here on top of this last 3rd chain, we are also adding 1 double crochet stitch. Like this. So now we have completed this row and it's only 1 left, and first we just have to start with an empty square. So for that we are first chaining 4, so 1, 2, 3 and 4, and chain of 4 counts as 1 double crochet plus chain 1 space. Then we are just turning our work and we kind of have to skip this first one and then also the next one, and then in there we are just adding 1 double crochet. Like that. So here again we have 1 block. Then if we follow this graph, we have filled squares. So again we just have to add 2 more double crochet stitches to make it as a filled one, like that. And then after that we have an empty one, so chaining 1 and skipping 1, and then in the next one adding 1 double crochet, like that. Then again we have filled one, so 2 more double crochet stitches to make it look as it's filled. So this is 1, and then also the second one, like that. And then we just have to add 1 final one as an empty one, and for that we are just chaining 1, skipping this double crochet, and then on top of this chain 3 we are adding 1 double crochet again, like that. So now we have created this very clunky heart shape, which is not that visible just because we are using very loose material, but this is basically how you are working with filet crochet graphs to understand where you have filled squares and where you have empty ones. And this was with using the chain base as a method, but now let's try it out with having single crochets as for the base, because I also feel like then it's easier to understand, especially for the starting point. Plus you are getting kind of like a nice border when you are progressing further with having these rows in here. So if we want to use single crochets as the base, the starting point is kind of similar. We are starting with doing a slip knot like this, and then we basically have to do some chains. And the amount of chains, as I mentioned, are determined by the amount of blocks that you have. Then you multiply it by 2 and add 2 more chains. So in this case, we would have to chain 12 in total. So let's do that. And now here I have my 12 chains, and now we can proceed with adding this base with single crochet stitches. And first, to get started, we just have to skip this last chain that we did, and then starting from the next one, we are just adding 1 single crochet stitch inside every single chain that we have here. So I'm just going through these chains and adding 1 single crochet inside every one of them. And here I'm just approaching the last chain and also adding a single crochet in there like this. So with these single crochets, we have basically just established a little bit more pronounced border, as it's when comparing with this where we only had chains. You can see that this one is a little bit thicker, and it might be useful because I kind of used it also for my dress, and it gave a nice border, meaning that I didn't have to worry about it later on. But of course that's optional. And then once we have created this first row as a border, we can now proceed with actually working on this first row. And for that, the process is the same. So now we have empty square, so we just have to chain 4, because that would count as 1 double crochet plus chain 1 space. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. Then we are turning our work like this, and then we just have to skip this first one because we already have our double crochet here, and then we are also skipping the next one because that would be the skipped stitch that would establish this square. And then in the next one we are just adding double crochet like that here, and then we also have in the following empty square, so chaining 1, skipping 1 and adding double crochet in the next one like that. And then we have our filled square, so again we are just adding 2 double crochet stitches to make it look as a filled. So this is 1, and then also another one right in there. And then as last, we just have 2 empty squares. So chaining 1, skipping 1 and adding 1 double crochet in the next one like that. And then again chaining 1, skipping 1 and adding 1 double crochet inside the very last one that we have like this. So now this first row is completed, and you can just proceed further with the next one. But from now on, the process is exactly the same as it is that I already showed you before. But this is basically how you do filet crochet, and how you're following all sorts of different graphs depending on if it's a filled square or empty square. And also now you should be able to calculate how many chains or stitches are needed to actually be able to start with following this type of graph. So I really hope that this was useful, but just let me know in case something was not clear, and I will try to help you with all your questions and everything else. So that was it from me today. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that this is going to be useful for you in case you are planning to pick up filet crochet. And as always, if you have any questions, then just let me know in the comment section below. And if you did enjoy this video, then please give me a big thumbs up. And if you're new here, then please subscribe, and I will see you later. Bye!